A virgin mountain man took in poor twin girls for one night, but they had shocking plans. In the middle of a raging snowstorm, a lonely cabin light flickers in the Colorado wilderness. Inside, a quiet mountain man opens his door to two shivering sisters, half frozen and begging for shelter. He thinks it's just one night of mercy, until he finds the letter they carried. A letter written in the hand of the woman he lost years ago. As dawn breaks, secrets unravel. These girls weren't lost at all. They came to his door for a reason. Now, hunted by cruel men and bound by a promise from the grave, the mountain man must decide: obey the law or follow his heart. Gun smoke will rise, old sins will burn, and one man's faith will be tested on the edge of mercy and justice. What will happen when a vow made in silence meets two souls desperate for salvation? And can one night of compassion change 3 lives forever? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The wind howled through Lost Elk Valley like a pack of hungry wolves, rattling the shutters of James Boone's modest log cabin. Inside, his calloused hands worked methodically at mending a broken trapline by the light of a tin lamp. The familiar motions brought him comfort as the February storm raged outside, snow piling deeper with each passing hour. James glanced up at the cabin's single window, now dark with the setting sun. The weathered glass barely held back the bitter cold that tried to seep through every crack and corner. He'd spent enough winters alone in these mountains to know this storm would last through the night, maybe longer. The broken trapline in his hands was strong hemp rope, frayed where some creature, probably a determined beaver, had gnawed through it. James tied off another careful knot, testing its strength. The rope would hold now, but he wouldn't be checking his traps tomorrow, not in this weather. Time to bank the fire, he murmured to himself, the sound of his own voice strange in the quiet cabin. Speaking aloud was a habit he'd picked up during the long winters, though he'd never admit it to anyone. 7 years of solitude had changed him in ways he tried not to dwell on. He stood, joints creaking like old leather, and moved to the stone fireplace. The flames had burned low, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. James reached for the iron poker, preparing to arrange the logs for a slow night's burn when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Thump, thump, thump. Someone was pounding on his door. James froze, poker in hand. In 7 years, no one had ever come to his door after nightfall, let alone in a blizzard. His Winchester rifle hung above the mantel, within easy reach. The pounding came again, more desperate this time. "Please." A girl's voice, young and frightened, barely carried through the thick door. "Please help us." Us. There was more than one. James set down the poker and took 3 long strides to the door. His hand hesitated on the latch. The war had taught him caution. There were men who'd use a woman's voice to lure out the unwary. But something in that plea struck deeper than his suspicion. He threw the bolt and pulled the door open, snow swirling into the cabin on a bitter gust. There on his threshold stood 2 girls, identical as mirror images, their blue calico dresses soaked through with snow. They couldn't have been more than 16 years old, and they were shaking so hard their teeth chattered. "Sir," the one on the left managed through bluish lips, "we've been walking. We saw your light." James looked past them into the howling darkness, searching for any sign of others, but there was only the endless curtain of snow. The girls swayed where they stood, exhausted beyond standing. "Get inside," he said gruffly, stepping back. "Quick now, before all the heat goes out." They stumbled through the door, tracking snow and ice across his plank floor. James shut out the storm and turned to study them properly in the lamplight. Their faces were identical. Same dark eyes, same small nose, but the one who'd spoken held herself differently, chin lifted despite her trembling. A protective arm around her sister marked her as the stronger one, or at least the one trying harder to be strong. "Sit," James ordered, pointing to the chairs near the fire. "Both of you." They obeyed without a word, huddling close to the flames. James retrieved a pair of rough wool blankets from his trunk and his mother's treasured quilt, the one thing he'd kept when he'd left Kentucky. The girls were still shaking as he draped the coverings around their shoulders. "Thank you, sir," the quieter twin whispered, clutching the quilt's faded pattern. "James Boone," he said, moving to stir up the fire. "No need for sir here." "I'm Lila Cooper," the first girl said, "and this is my sister Lucy." Her voice was steadier now, though exhaustion lined every word. "We've been walking for 2 days, since Drift Creek burned." James had heard of Drift Creek, a small settlement about 20 miles downstream. "Burned?" he asked, adding another log to the fire. Lila nodded, but didn't elaborate. Her sister Lucy pressed closer to her side, eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "You need food," James decided, pushing aside his questions for the moment. He moved to the iron pot that hung at the edge of the hearth, where the remains of his dinner still simmered. Simple fare, rabbit stew with dried vegetables and barley, but hot and filling. While he ladled stew into tin bowls, James watched the girls from the corner of his eye. Their clothes, though sodden now, were well made. Their speech was educated, not rough frontier talk. These weren't trappers' daughters or homesteaders' children. Something had driven them far from their proper place, out into the wilderness in the dead of winter. He cut thick slices from his dwindling loaf of bread and set the bowls before them. "Eat slow," he cautioned. "Your stomachs need to remember how." They ate carefully, with manners that spoke of gentle raising. Lucy's hands shook less as warmth and food began to work their way through her, and some color returned to their pale faces. James sat in his own chair, deliberately keeping his distance. "We can't thank you enough, Mr. Boone," Lila said when her bowl was empty. She seemed to be gathering her courage for something. "But we need to ask—" "You can stay the night," James cut in, not unkindly. "Storm's too fierce to turn anyone out. We'll talk more in the morning." Relief flooded both girls' faces. Lucy's eyes welled with tears she quickly wiped away. James stood and gathered their bowls. "I'll make up pallets by the hearth. You'll be warm enough there." Using his spare blankets and some old buffalo robes, he arranged sleeping spots close to the fire, but not too near his own bed in the corner. The girls watched him work, their eyes growing heavy now that they were warm and fed. "Much obliged," Lila murmured as they settled onto their pallets. Lucy was already half asleep, still clutching the quilt's familiar pattern of stars and crosses. James grunted in acknowledgement and moved his rifle from the mantel to rest against his bed frame, within easy reach. Not that he truly feared these two slip of girls, but old habits died hard. He banked the fire one final time, checking that the spark screen was secure before retiring to his own bed. The wind still moaned outside, but the sound was different now, less lonely somehow. James lay in the darkness, listening to the soft breathing of his unexpected guests. It had been so long since another human voice had filled these walls, so long since he'd had to think about anyone's needs but his own. He found himself praying, something he hadn't done properly in years, not elaborate prayers like the circuit preachers used to give, but simple words from the heart. "Lord," he whispered into the darkness, "give me strength for whatever you're asking, and protect these children you've sent to my door." The girl slept on, peaceful now in the firelight. Snow continued to fall outside, but inside the cabin something had changed. James felt it in his bones. This storm had brought more than just travelers seeking shelter. It had brought heaven's hand, reaching down to touch his solitary life. As sleep finally came to him, James wondered what morning would reveal. But that was tomorrow's concern. For now, there was only the quiet of the cabin, the crackling of the fire, and the soft breathing of souls at rest while the storm raged on. Dawn crept over Lost Elk Valley, painting the snow-laden pines in gentle strokes of rose and gold. Inside the cabin, James stirred from his fitful sleep, decades of habit pulling him awake with the first light. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving only glowing embers beneath a blanket of gray ash. He sat up slowly, muscles stiff from the cold, and reached for his boots. The familiar morning silence felt different somehow, heavier, more expectant. Then he remembered his visitors. James turned toward the hearth, already certain the pallets would be empty. Folk like that, educated girls with proper manners, wouldn't linger in a mountain man's cabin. But the sight that greeted him stopped him cold. The Cooper twins knelt side by side on the rough plank floor, heads bent together over his mother's Bible. The one he knew was Lila read aloud in a low, clear voice, while Lucy followed the words with her finger. Morning light streaming through the cabin's single window caught their dark hair, giving it the same amber sheen he remembered from long ago, from another girl who'd loved Scripture just as deeply. "The Lord is my shepherd," Lila read, her voice gentle but sure. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." James sat frozen on his bed, unable to move. The resemblance was uncanny. Not just their coloring, but the way they held themselves, the quiet grace in their movements. They could have been younger sisters to Clara Wren, the schoolteacher's daughter he'd loved and lost so many years ago. A floorboard creaked beneath his weight, and both girls looked up. "Good morning, Mr. Boone," Lila said, closing the Bible carefully. "We hope you don't mind. We found your mother's Bible when we were folding the blankets." "No," he managed, his voice rough from sleep and memory. "No, I don't mind." He stood and moved to the fireplace, needing the familiar routine of morning chores to steady himself. The girls watched as he added kindling and small logs, nursing the embers back to life with practiced care. "We can help with breakfast," Lucy offered shyly. It was the most words she'd spoken since arriving. James shook his head. "Sit. You both still look worn through." He set about preparing a simple meal: cornmeal mush sweetened with the last of his molasses, dried apples reconstituted in hot water, and strong black coffee. The familiar tasks helped calm his racing thoughts, but he couldn't shake the echo of Clara in their every movement. The girls settled at his small table, backs straight despite their obvious exhaustion. James served them each a bowl before taking his own seat, noting how they waited until he began eating before picking up their spoons. Proper manners, indeed. "Mr. Boone," Lila began after a few quiet moments. She glanced at her sister, who gave a slight nod. "We need to tell you something, about why we're here." James set down his spoon, dread and anticipation mingling in his chest. "Speak your piece, then." "We didn't just stumble on your cabin by accident," Lila continued. "We were sent here by Miss Clara Wren's sister, Martha." The name hit him like a physical blow. James gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Clara's sister?" Lucy reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a letter, carefully folded and protected in oilskin. "Miss Clara passed away 3 weeks ago," she said softly. "From consumption. But before she died, she gave this to us. For you." James stared at the letter she held out. Even from across the table, he recognized the careful, flowing script that spelled out his name. Clara's handwriting, as distinctive as her laugh had been. She wasn't... His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I thought she died. In the fire. 15 years ago. No, sir, Lila said gently. She survived. She's been living with her sister Martha these past years, helping raise us and the other girls at the mission school. James pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Excuse me, he muttered. Need to chop wood. He grabbed his coat and axe, all but fleeing the cabin. The morning air struck his face like a slap, shockingly cold after the warmth inside. Snow was falling again, fat, lazy flakes that drifted down through the steel-gray sky. James stumped through knee-deep snow to his chopping block, the familiar motions of setting up logs steadying his shaking hands. Clara had lived. All these years of grief and guilt, of believing she'd died in that terrible fire, and she had lived. The axe bit deep into the first log with a satisfying thunk. James lost himself in the rhythm of the work, trying to outpace his thoughts. Thunk. Clara had lived. Thunk. She'd helped raise those girls. Thunk. She'd written him a letter before she died. He didn't know how long he'd been at it when the cabin door creaked open. Snow had dusted his shoulders and collected in the growing pile of split wood. Mr. Boone? It was Lila, wrapped in one of his spare blankets. We've washed up the breakfast things, and... She hesitated. The letter will keep, if you're not ready. James leaned on his axe handle, studying her. Why did Martha send you to me? She said you were the only righteous man left in these parts, Lila answered simply. Said you'd know what to do. What to do about what? But Lila just shook her head. That's in the letter, sir, when you're ready to read it. James looked past her to the cabin, where Lucy stood in the doorway. 2 young girls with nowhere else to go, sent to him by Clara's dying wish. His conscience warred with his desire for solitude, for the simple life he'd built here. The trail won't be passable for days, he said finally. Maybe weeks with this weather. You can stay until it clears. Relief flooded Lila's face. Thank you, Mr. Boone. We won't be any trouble. He nodded curtly and turned back to his chopping. After a moment, he heard the cabin door close behind them. The morning wore on, snow continuing to fall in that lazy, endless way that meant the storm had settled in for a long stay. James worked until his arms ached, until the woodpile was higher than he'd need for a week. Anything to keep moving, to keep from thinking about that letter waiting inside. When the light began to fade, he shouldered his rifle and went to check his trap lines. The familiar trail through the woods offered some comfort, though the fresh snow had buried any signs of game. He worked his way through the snares methodically, finding most sprung empty by the storm. At the last trap, he paused. Snow was gathering on his shoulders again, and the wind had picked up, carrying the promise of another hard night. James reached into his coat and touched the letter he'd tucked away before leaving the cabin, still safe in its oilskin wrapper. Clara, he whispered into the gathering dark. His voice was swallowed by the softly falling snow, but speaking her name aloud broke something loose in his chest. Oh, Clara! The snow continued to fall as James turned back toward the cabin, where lamplight now glowed in the window and smoke curled from the chimney. Whatever that letter held, whatever burden Clara and her sister had meant to lay on him, he knew his solitary days were over. Heaven had sent him these girls for a reason, and he would not turn them away. Not when they carried Clara's last words with them. The storm tightened its grip on Lost Elk Valley over the next 2 days, heaping snow against the cabin's walls until the windows showed nothing but white. Inside, James found himself adjusting to a rhythm he'd nearly forgotten, the gentle bustle of shared living. "Like this?" Lucy asked, carefully lifting the heavy iron coffee pot. Steam rose from its spout as she poured the dark liquid into 3 tin cups. "That's right," James nodded, watching from his chair by the stove where he was showing Lila how to darn a sock. "Mind the handle doesn't get too hot." The morning light filtered softly through the snow-covered windows, casting everything in a peaceful blue glow. James had to admit the cabin felt different with the girls there, warmer somehow, despite the howling wind outside. "Now thread the needle under, like so," he demonstrated for Lila, his rough hands looking enormous next to her delicate ones. "Then back through. Makes the weave stronger." Lila copied his movement exactly, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "It's like embroidery almost. Aunt Martha taught us that." James felt the familiar tightness in his chest at the mention of Clara's sister, but he kept his voice steady. "Your aunt taught you well, seems like." Lucy brought them each a cup of coffee, setting them carefully on the small table. The rich aroma filled the cabin, mixing with wood smoke and the lingering scent of breakfast biscuits. "We can sweep up after this," Lucy offered, settling beside her sister. "There's pine needles by the door." James shook his head. "No need to—" But Lila interrupted gently. "Please, Mr. Boone, we want to help. It's only right you taking us in like this." He studied them both for a long moment. These 2 girls who'd appeared like ghosts from his past. Their faces were gaining color again after their ordeal, and regular meals had brought back some of their strength. Still, he worried about propriety. "Folk might talk," he said finally, voicing the concern that had been gnawing at him. "2 young ladies staying with a bachelor. It ain't proper." "The nearest neighbor's 10 miles away," Lila pointed out reasonably. "And no one's moving in this weather." As if to emphasize her point, a gust of wind rattled the shutters. The blizzard had sealed them all away from the world, creating a pocket of peace James hadn't known he'd been missing. Throughout the day, the girls moved about the cabin with quiet efficiency. They found the broom and swept, humming hymns as they worked. James recognized Amazing Grace and What a Friend We Have in Jesus, songs Clara used to sing during Sunday services. By afternoon, he'd shown them how to bank the fire in the stove, explaining the delicate balance of heat and air that kept the flames steady through the night. They were quick learners, these girls, their eyes bright with intelligence. "Like this?" Lucy asked, adjusting a log with the poker. "Just so," James approved. "You've got a good touch for it." The praise made her smile, and for a moment she looked so much like Clara that James had to turn away, pretending to check the woodpile. Evening came early, as it always did in winter. James lit the oil lamp while the girls set out bowls of bean soup and the last of the morning's biscuits. They'd fallen into an easy routine already, despite his misgivings. After supper, they gathered near the stove's warmth. The wind had died down some, leaving only the occasional whisper against the walls. In the peaceful quiet, Lila finally asked the question he'd been dreading. "Mr. Boone?" Her voice was gentle. "Would you tell us about Miss Clara? From before?" James stared into the flames through the stove's iron grate. For so long, he'd kept those memories locked away, like precious things too painful to examine. But now, with Clara's letter still unopened in his coat pocket and her nieces waiting patiently, the words came. "We were to be married," he said softly. "Spring of '53, in Abilene. She was teaching at the school there, living with the Reverend's family." He paused, gathering his thoughts. There was a fire. Bad one. Took half the town, including the school and the parsonage where she stayed. They told me she didn't make it out." He looked up to find both girls watching him intently. Something passed between them, a glance heavy with meaning, but they remained silent. "That's why I came up here," he continued. "Couldn't bear to stay, knowing she was gone. Thought maybe if I lived right, kept to myself, I'd see her again in heaven someday." The quiet that followed was broken only by the pop and crackle of the fire. Finally, Lucy reached over and touched his hand briefly. "Thank you for telling us," she said softly. They retired soon after, the girls to their pallet by the hearth, James to his narrow bed behind the curtain. He listened to their whispered prayers, adding his own silent ones for guidance. The storm began to ease on the third morning. Patches of pale sky showed between the clouds, and the wind dropped to a gentle murmur. James pulled on his heavy coat and boots. "I need to check the trap lines," he told the girls. "Won't be gone more than a few hours." "We'll keep the fire going," Lila promised. "Be careful out there." The snow was deep, past his knees in places, but James knew these woods like his own heart. He worked his way through the trapline methodically, finding most empty. The storm had driven the animals to ground. The sun was low when he turned back toward the cabin. As he approached, he saw smoke rising straight and steady from the chimney, and warm lamplight spilled from the windows. For the first time in years, someone was waiting for his return. Inside, he found the girls had laid out supper, beans and salt pork they'd seasoned with dried herbs found in his mother's old jar. The cabin was swept clean, his spare shirts mended and folded, and a pot of coffee kept warm on the stove. "Welcome back," Lucy said shyly, taking his snow-crusted coat. "We saved you a plate," Lila added, already moving to serve him. James stood for a moment, overwhelmed by the simple domesticity of it all. How long had it been since anyone had cared whether he came home? Since anyone had saved him a plate or took his coat? That night, after the dishes were cleaned and the fire banked, they knelt together for prayers. James listened as the girls thanked the Lord for shelter, for safety, for finding him. Their faith was clear and strong, unmarred by doubt or bitterness. "And Lord," Lila added softly, "watch over Mr. Boone, who's been so kind to take us in." "Amen," Lucy whispered. "Amen," James echoed, and found he meant it truly. Later, lying in his bed, he listened to their steady breathing and the gentle pop of the stove. The letter from Clara still waited, but for now, there was peace in the cabin. A fragile peace, perhaps, built on unspoken things, but peace nonetheless. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the valley pristine under stars that shone like ice. Inside, the walls of solitude James had built so carefully were cracking, letting in something that felt dangerously like hope. Morning brought a gentle thaw. Water dripped from the cabin's eaves in a steady rhythm as James stepped outside, axe in hand. The valley lay hushed under its white blanket, but the February sun had enough strength now to soften the snow's crust. He set up the chopping block, his breath clouding in the crisp air. The steady swing of the axe always cleared his mind, helping him sort through troubled thoughts. The letter from Clara weighed heavy in his consciousness, though he hadn't read it yet. Part of him wanted to leave it forever sealed, preserving the past as he'd always known it. The crack of splitting wood echoed across the snow. James had built up a decent pile when he heard the cabin door creak open. Lila stood there, wrapped in his mother's old shawl. In her hand was an envelope, worn at the edges as if it had been carried far. "Mr. Boone." Her voice was quiet but determined. "I reckon it's time you read this." James set down the axe and wiped his palms on his coat. The envelope trembled slightly as he took it, Clara's familiar handwriting making his heart catch. To James Boone, Lost Elk Valley. "We'll be inside," Lila said softly, leaving him alone with the past. The paper was thin, covered in Clara's neat script. James had to blink several times before the words came clear. "Dearest James, if you are reading this, I am truly gone now, though not in the way you believed all these years. I pray you can forgive me for letting you think I perished in that fire. My shame at losing faith after such tragedy made me a coward. I couldn't face you with my doubts, couldn't bear to bring that darkness into your pure belief. Instead, I went west with my sister, helping her raise these precious girls after their mother passed. I found my way back to God through their innocent faith, teaching them as I once taught other children. But now they need more protection than I can provide. I beg you, James, help my nieces find safety from wicked men who would claim them. Your cabin was always a sanctuary of righteousness. Shelter them as you once promised to shelter me. Enclosed is the deed to land near Willow Flats, signed in my maiden name. I meant to tell you everything, to make things right, but consumption worked faster than my courage. The land and my savings are now theirs by law, though others may dispute it. You were ever the most honorable man I knew. These girls need that honor now more than ever. With eternal love and regret, Clara." James stared at the second paper. A land deed, just as she'd written. His hands shook as he folded both documents carefully. Clara had lived years beyond that fire, teaching children, finding her way back to faith. The knowledge was both bitter and sweet, like medicine that might eventually heal. Inside the cabin, the twins sat close together by the fire. Lucy's eyes were red, and Lila held her sister's hand tight. They looked up as James entered, their faces full of anxious hope. He pulled up a chair, settling heavily. "Tell me true now," he said gently. "What happened in Drift Creek?" Lucy began to cry softly. Lila squared her shoulders, though her voice shook. "Pa was a good man once, but the drink took him after Ma died. He started gambling at Mr. Wade's saloon, said he could win enough to send us east to school, like Aunt Clara wanted. Instead, he lost everything," Lucy whispered. Lila nodded. "When Pa couldn't pay, Mr. Wade said he'd take it out in trade. Said we could work off the debt in his dance house." Her chin lifted defiantly. "But we knew what that meant. Aunt Clara had warned us about such places." James's hands tightened on his knees. He'd seen such dance houses in his scouting days, places where desperate girls were trapped in sin and shame. "Pa tried to stop him?" Lucy continued, dabbing at her tears. "There was a fight. Pa fell or was pushed down the saloon stairs. He didn't get up again." "Wade gave us one day to grieve," Lila said. "Said he'd collect us after the funeral. But Aunt Clara had told us where to find you if trouble came. We took her letter and what money we could find, and we ran." "Through the snow," Lucy added. 2 days walking, like you said. We were so scared he'd catch us." James stood abruptly, moving to the window. The valley lay peaceful, but his soldiers' instincts were awakening. Men like Wade didn't let valuable property escape without pursuit. The snow had covered the girls' tracks, but the thaw would open the trails again. He turned back to them, his decision made. "No harm will touch you while you're under my roof," he said firmly. "That's my solemn word." Relief washed over their faces. Lucy began crying again, but this time from gratitude. Lila just nodded, as if she'd never doubted him. James spent the rest of the day checking his ammunition and oiling his old army rifle. He cleaned his revolver too, though he prayed he wouldn't need either. The girls watched him work, understanding in their eyes. As evening settled over the valley, James stepped outside one last time. The sky had cleared completely, stars pricking through the darkness like ice crystals. The night was still, but he knew now it wasn't truly peaceful. Somewhere out there, wicked men might be planning to claim what was never rightfully theirs. He checked the rifle's action one more time before heading inside. The smooth click of metal was reassuring. He'd fought for right before, in the war. If needed, he would do so again. The girls had supper waiting, a rabbit stew that smelled of herbs and home. They said grace together, their words a quiet defiance against the darkness beyond their walls. James added his own silent prayer. For strength to keep his word, for wisdom to protect these innocent lives, and for forgiveness, both Clara's and his own. The morning sun glinted off melting snow as James checked his trap lines. 3 days of warmer weather had softened the valley's white blanket, turning the ground treacherous with mud and slush. He'd just reset a snare when something caught his eye. Fresh tracks cutting across a patch of dirty snow. His heart quickened. 2 horses had passed this way not long ago, their hoofprints clear in the wet earth. The riders weren't following any proper trail, instead moving in a searching pattern that spoke of purpose. James straightened slowly, scanning the quiet valley. Years of scouting had taught him to read such signs. These weren't casual travelers. They were hunting for something, or someone. He hurried back to his horse, leading it carefully to avoid making noise. The cabin came into view through the trees, smoke rising straight from the chimney in the still air. Through the window, he could see Lucy sweeping while Lila worked dough at the table. James entered quickly, startling them both. "We've got company coming," he said softly. "Up to the loft, both of you. Quick and quiet now." The girls didn't hesitate. They'd clearly practiced this drill, climbing swiftly up the ladder. James helped them pull it after them, then scattered some empty sacks over the trap door. He'd just finished when hoofbeats approached outside. Taking a deep breath, James stepped onto his small porch. His rifle stayed inside, propped near the door where he could reach it fast if needed. 2 riders emerged from the trees, their horses picking carefully through the melting snow. They were well-dressed for the territory. Too well-dressed. Their coats were city-cut, their boots polished despite the mud. Both wore gun belts that showed more care than wear. James had seen their kind before during the war, men who played at authority while serving darker purposes. "Morning, friend," called the older one, touching the brim of his hat. "Hope we're not disturbing you?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "No disturbance," James answered calmly. "Not many visitors this time of year." The younger man shifted in his saddle, hand resting too casually near his pistol. "We're lawmen," he said. "Looking for 2 runaway sisters? Young girls? Twins? Seen anyone matching that description?" James kept his face neutral, though his pulse quickened. "Can't say that I have. Been a quiet winter up here. Mind if we look around?" The older man was already dismounting. "Just doing our duty, you understand. Girl's uncle is mighty worried about them." "Your badges?" James asked mildly. "If you're lawmen." The pair exchanged a quick glance. "Left them with our papers in town," said the older one smoothly. "But we can fetch the marshal if you'd prefer to do this official-like." James noted how their hands stayed near their weapons. These men were used to intimidation, not law. He forced a smile. "No need for that. Was just about to brew some coffee. Welcome to step inside and warm up while I tell you what I know of the trails hereabout." The invitation surprised them. The younger one started to speak, but his companion cut him off. "Much obliged. Weather's been fierce lately." James led them inside, moving deliberately. He'd positioned himself between the men and his rifle, though they likely didn't notice. The cabin looked perfectly ordinary, just a trapper's simple home. No sign of young girls anywhere. "Sugar's there on the shelf," James said, measuring coffee into the pot. "Might take a few minutes to boil." The men glanced around with poorly hidden impatience. The younger one prowled the small space while his partner tried to draw James out. "Folks in Mill Junction said you've been up here near 20 years, he remarked. "Must get lonely." "The Lord provides company enough," James answered, nodding toward his mother's Bible on the table. He saw the slight sneer this brought to the younger man's face. "Ain't seen no tracks heading north," the older man tried. "Girls must have come this way. Young things like that in this weather. Christian duty to help find them." "Indeed." James poured their coffee slowly. "Though I reckon if they were running from something, might be Christian duty to ask why." A dangerous silence followed his words. The younger man's hand drifted to his gun, but the older one shook his head slightly. "Now, friend," he said, his voice hardening. "Wouldn't want folks thinking you're harboring runaways. That's against the law. Man living alone, 2 young girls. People might get the wrong idea." James met his gaze steadily. "The Lord knows my heart," he said quietly, "and my conscience." The threat hung in the air between them. Finally, the older man set down his cup. "We'll be moving on, but we'll be back, with proper authority next time." They mounted up outside, no longer bothering with politeness. James watched them ride away, noting their direction. Only when they were well gone did he help the girls down from the loft. "Pack some food," he told them gently. "I need to ride into Mill Junction, see what's stirring. You stay inside, keep the door barred. I'll be back before dark." The 5-mile ride to Mill Junction took longer than usual with the muddy trails. The small hamlet was barely more than a crossroads. A general store, a smithy, and a handful of houses clustered around the old lumber mill. Silas Wade, the storekeeper, was arranging goods when James entered. The bell above the door brought his head up. "James Boone, rare to see you twice in 1 month." "Need some extra provisions," James said casually, moving to examine the notices tacked beside the counter. There, among the usual advertisements for horse sales and prayer meetings, were 2 new papers. The first bore an official seal. "Notice is hereby given that Marshal Andrew Weller seeks information regarding 2 orphaned sisters, Lucy and Lila Cooper, aged 16 years, last seen departing the town of Drift Creek. $10 reward for news of their whereabouts." Beside it hung a second notice, this one offering $100 for the same information. It was signed by Theodore Wade, owner of the Silver Slipper Saloon in Drift Creek. "Terrible business, that," Silas remarked, following James's gaze. "Marshall himself came through yesterday, posting those. Said the girls ran away from their legal guardian after their pa died." "That so?" James kept his voice neutral as he gathered supplies. Extra coffee, flour, ammunition for his rifle. Silas lowered his voice. "Course my cousin over in Drift Creek tells it different. Says old Wade's been taking in orphans for years. Girls mostly. Never seem to leave town once he gets his hands on them." James nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken warning. "Reckon that's between him and his maker." "Reckon so." Silas began wrapping James's purchases. "Them hired men of his were asking after you specific. Mentioned you by name." "That so?" James kept his tone mild, but his mind was racing. "Told them what I tell everyone. James Boone's a God-fearing man who minds his own business." Silas finished tying the packages. "Course, if he was to help some folks in trouble, that'd be between him and the Lord." "Much obliged," James said quietly, understanding the storekeeper's careful words. "Best get home before dark." The sun was setting as James approached his cabin. Golden light spilled from the windows, and with it came the sound of singing. The girls' sweet voices carried clearly through the evening air. "Nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee, e'en though it be a cross that raiseth me." James reined in for a moment, letting the hymn wash over him. The words seemed to hang in the twilight, a gentle defiance against the darkness gathering both in the valley and in the hearts of wicked men. He said his own quiet prayer before dismounting. The Lord had sent these lambs to his door. Now he had to choose between the law of man and the higher law of mercy. But looking at the warm light of home, hearing those innocent voices raised in praise, James knew his choice was already made. He would protect them, whatever the cost. Clara would have expected no less. Morning sunlight glinted off the melting snow, turning Lost Elk Valley into a sea of diamonds. James stood on his cabin's porch, watching water drip steadily from the eaves. The past week's warmth had started the spring thaw early, and trickling streams now traced paths down every hillside. "Mind your feet there," he called, as Lila and Lucy followed him outside. Both girls wore his spare wool socks pulled up over their boots, not pretty, but warm and practical. "Ground's treacherous when it's half frozen like this." "Yes, sir," they answered together, carefully testing each step. James had to admit they were quick learners. 2 weeks of cabin life had already strengthened them. Their cheeks had more color, and their hands were growing calloused from honest work. "Today we learn tracking," he explained, leading them toward the creek. "Most important skill out here, besides keeping warm and fed?" He pointed to marks in the wet snow. "What do you see there?" Lila knelt down, squinting. "Looks like deer prints? Good eye." James nodded approvingly. "See how they're deeper on one side? Tells you which way the animal was heading. Lucy, come look at this one." Lucy joined her sister. Blue calico skirts gathered carefully above the slush. "These are different. Rounder? Rabbit." James traced the outline with his finger. "Notice how they group in sets of 4. Front paws land, then back paws hop over. Knowing prints means knowing where to set traps, and which areas to avoid if you're trying to stay hidden." The girls exchanged a quick glance at his last words. They all knew why such knowledge might be needed. But James kept his tone light, focusing on the lesson. For the next hour, he showed them how to read the story written in mud and melting snow. Fox prints near the henhouse, raccoon tracks by the stream, the scrape marks where a buck had rubbed his antlers on a young pine. "Your turn," he said finally, pointing to a fresh set of marks. "Tell me what passed here." The twins studied the ground intently. "Something heavy," Lila ventured. "Deep prints." "And look here," Lucy added. "Broken twigs about shoulder height. Whatever it was tall." James felt a surge of pride. "Very good. That was a moose, probably yesterday morning. Now let's see about setting some snares." They spent the rest of the morning learning to tie proper trapper's knots and place wire loops where rabbits were likely to pass. James explained how to angle the nooses, where to secure the anchor points, how to disguise human scent with pine needles. "Remember," he cautioned, "check every trap daily. Never leave an animal to suffer. The Lord gave us dominion over his creatures, but that means responsibility too." Back at the cabin, Lucy had a pot of beans simmering on the stove. The girl had a gift for cooking, managing to make even simple trail food taste like home. While she stirred the pot, Lila spread out James's mother's Bible on the table, carefully turning the tissue-thin pages. "Would you read to us while we eat?" she asked James. "Aunt Clara always said breaking bread without scripture was like eating without salt." James's throat tightened at the mention of Clara, but he nodded. The girls had brought such life back to his cabin, not just in their cooking and cleaning, but in the way they kept God's word central to each day. Like Clara had. After the meal, he showed them how to strap on snowshoes, essential gear for moving through deep drifts. The wooden frames were too big for their feet, but they managed well enough, laughing as they practiced walking with the awkward things. "Like ducks on ice," Lucy giggled, catching her sister's arm as they wobbled across the yard. "Better ducks than drowned rats," James said dryly. "These might save your life someday. Deep snow can trap you faster than quicksand if you're not careful." They practiced until the afternoon sun began to fade. Inside, Lucy set to mending one of James's old shirts while Lila banked the fire. The domestic piece of it all made James's chest ache strangely. "Mr. Boone?" Lucy's quiet voice broke into his thoughts. "May I ask you something?" He nodded, settling into his chair by the stove. "Why did you never marry? After Aunt Clara, I mean." James stared into the flames for a long moment. The girls waited patiently, needles clicking softly. "Reckon I was afraid," he said finally. "Afraid of failing in God's sight. Afraid of losing another heart." He touched the worn Bible beside him. "Easier to live alone than risk that pain again." "Aunt Clara used to talk about you sometimes," Lila said softly. "Said you had a good man's hands, strong enough to build, gentle enough to heal." James looked down at his scarred, calloused palms. "She was always seeing the best in folks." "She was usually right about them too," Lucy added, tying off her thread. "Said you were the kind of man who'd do right even when it hurt." A faint smile touched James's lips. The first real smile either girl had seen from him. "Your aunt had a way of seeing straight through to a person's soul. Reckon that's why I loved her so." The confession hung in the warm air. Neither girl spoke, but Lucy reached over and squeezed his hand briefly before returning to her sewing. Days passed quietly after that. The girls threw themselves into cabin life with growing confidence. Lucy proved to have a real talent with needle and thread, turning James's rough attempts at mending into neat, strong seams. Lila kept the fire fed and the Bible open, marking passages with bits of yarn and reading aloud in the evenings. James found himself looking forward to their shared meals, to the sound of their voices raised in hymns as they worked. Even his daily chores seemed lighter somehow. The cabin felt like home again, not just shelter. But he never forgot the danger. Each evening before bolting the door, he would walk the perimeter of his property, checking for signs of strangers. The girls learned to watch for his signal, 3 taps on the window frame, before opening up at day's end. It was on one such evening patrol that he saw them. Fresh hoofprints in the mud near the creek, at least 2 horses. His heart turned to ice as he studied the marks. The riders had stopped here, probably watching the cabin. Then they'd turned back toward Mill Junction. The peaceful illusion shattered. James hurried back to the cabin, mind racing. The men would return, that was certain, and next time, they'd likely bring the marshal with them. Through the window, he could see the twins setting out supper, their faces peaceful in the lamplight. They'd brought such warmth back to his life. Now he had to find a way to protect that precious gift, whatever the cost. Inside, Lucy was pouring coffee while Lila set his mother's Bible beside his plate, as usual. Such a simple thing, that small act of devotion. Such a reminder of all he stood to lose. "Everything all right, Mr. Boone?" Lucy asked, noting his expression. James forced himself to smile. "Just checking the weather, child. Just checking the weather." But his hand strayed to the rifle above the door, and his prayers that night were longer than usual. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Lost Elk Valley as James repaired a loose shutter. Winter's fury had taken its toll on the cabin's exterior, and the warming weather meant time for fixes. He worked steadily, hammer striking nails with practiced rhythm, while Lucy and Lila swept the porch behind him. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them all freeze. Inside, James whispered urgently, "Under the floor, just like we practiced." The girls grabbed their brooms and vanished through the door. James heard the soft scrape of the loose floorboard being lifted. Then silence. His heart hammered as he turned to face the rider. A tall man on a bay horse emerged from the tree line. Even at a distance, the silver star on his chest caught the sunlight. This was no hired gun. This was real law. James set his hammer down carefully and stood straight, touching the brim of his hat as the marshal approached. The rider's weather-beaten face and precise posture spoke of years enforcing order in wild country. "Afternoon," the marshal called, reining his horse to a stop. "United States Marshal Daniel Weller." He dismounted with the careful movements of a man who had spent too many hours in the saddle. "James Boone," James replied evenly. "Can I offer you coffee, Marshal?" Weller nodded, though his eyes were already scanning the cabin's exterior. "Much obliged. Long ride from Mill Junction?" James led the way inside, acutely aware of the loose board near the hearth where the twins huddled below. He busied himself with the coffee pot, keeping his movements deliberate and calm despite the thunder of his pulse. "Nice place you've got here," Weller commented, settling into one of the wooden chairs. "Peaceful." "The Lord provides," James answered simply, setting 2 tin cups on the table. The marshal pulled a folded paper from his vest. "I expect you know why I'm here, Mr. Boone. 2 young ladies went missing from Drift Creek about 3 weeks back. Twins, 15 years old, blue calico dresses." He smoothed the wanted notice on the table. "Seen anyone matching that description?" James poured the coffee slowly, buying seconds to steady his voice. "Can't say that I have, Marshal. Don't get many visitors up here, especially in winter. Just elk and ravens, mostly." Below the floorboards, he could almost feel the twins holding their breath. "That so?" Weller took a slow sip of coffee. "Because I've got witnesses saying they saw smoke from your chimney all through that big storm. Awful lot of wood for one man to burn." "Cold winter," James replied. "Had to keep the fire up day and night." The marshal studied him over the rim of his cup. "These girls are wanted for theft and breach of contract, Mr. Boone. Their father lost them in a gambling debt, legal and binding under territorial law. The saloon owner they're promised to is offering a healthy reward." James's hand tightened on his cup. "Doesn't seem right. Selling young girls to pay a dead man's debts." "Right and legal ain't always the same thing," Weller agreed. "But the law's the law. Anyone found helping them could face federal charges. 5 years hard labor, minimum." A board creaked softly near the hearth. James coughed to cover the sound. "Like I said, Marshal, haven't seen any girls. Just me and the good book up here." Weller finished his coffee and stood, adjusting his gun belt. "Mind if I look around?" "You're right as law," James said, though his stomach clenched. "But I've got traps set all around the property. Wouldn't want you stepping in one by accident." The marshal's eyes narrowed slightly. "That a threat, Mr. Boone?" "No, sir. Just being neighborly." James met his gaze steadily. "Those steel jaws can take a man's foot clean off." After a long moment, Weller nodded. "Reckon I'll take your word then." He pulled another wanted poster from his vest and laid it on the table. "In case you do see them, my office is in Mill Junction." James walked him to the door. Outside, the marshal swung onto his horse with practiced ease. "Word of advice, Mr. Boone? Sometimes mercy and justice don't walk the same path. Man's got to choose which trail to follow." "I aim to follow the Lord's path, Marshal," James replied quietly. "He knows my heart." "Better hope he's the only one," Weller said. He touched his hat brim and turned his horse toward town. James watched until rider and mount disappeared into the trees. Only then did he release the breath he had been holding. "It's safe now, girls." The floorboard scraped back, and two pale faces emerged. Lucy was trembling, but Lila's eyes blazed with anger. "Our pa never had the right to sell us," she said fiercely. "No man does." James helped them up, his heart aching at their fear. "No, child, he didn't." He picked up the wanted poster and walked to the stove. The paper curled and blackened as he fed it into the firebox, watching until it was nothing but ash. But the weight of his lie pressed heavy on his soul. Never in his adult life had he spoken false to the law. Even during the war, as a Union scout, he had lived by strict truth. That night, after the girls went up to their loft, James knelt beside his narrow bed. The moon cast silver light through the window as he bowed his head. "Lord," he whispered, "I broke your commandment today, spoke false to your appointed authority." His hands gripped together tightly. "But those children, they're innocent as lambs. If protecting them is sin, then I accept your judgment. Just show me the right path. Give me wisdom to guard them as you would have me do." Above in the loft, soft sniffling revealed that the twins were awake and listening. Their quiet tears of gratitude fell like rain on James's prayers. He remained on his knees long into the night, wrestling with his conscience like Jacob with the angel. When dawn finally broke over the mountains, it found him still deep in communion with his God. The girls came down quietly as first light touched the cabin windows. No one spoke of the marshal's visit as they went about their morning tasks. James split wood, while Lucy made biscuits, and Lila fed the chickens. But a new understanding flowed between them. Deeper than words, stronger than law. They had chosen their path together now. Whatever came, they would face it as family. When breakfast was ready, they joined hands around, the table as always. James's prayer was simple but fierce with conviction. "Lord, guard your children, guide our steps, grant us courage for the trail ahead. Amen." "Amen," the twins whispered, and squeezed his rough hands tight. Outside, spring birds began their morning songs. A new day dawned over Lost Elk Valley, bright with promise, heavy with choices made and prices yet to pay. The last patches of snow surrendered to April's gentle warmth. Where drifts had guarded the cabin's wooden stoop all winter, tender green shoots now pushed through dark earth. James paused in his morning chores, kneeling to touch the delicate purple petals of the season's first crocuses. "Look what the Lord's given us," he called softly to the twins, who were hanging fresh-washed linens on the line. Lucy hurried over, her eyes brightening at the sight. "Oh, they're just like the ones that used to grow by Aunt Clara's schoolhouse." She crouched beside James, carefully touching one velvet bloom. "Means the ground's finally warm enough for planting," Lila observed practically, though her smile was gentle as she watched her sister's delight. "We ought to put in that garden we talked about, Mr. James." He nodded, surprised at how natural it felt now to hear them call him that. Not quite father, but something more than stranger. "Reckon you're right. Ground soft enough to turn." He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "Got some seeds saved from last fall's harvest. Not much, but it's a start." The next morning found them all three working the earth beside the cabin's south wall. James's strong arms broke the soil with a spade while the girls followed behind, pulling stones and roots. Their laughter rose sweet and clear in the spring air as they worked. "Here now," James demonstrated, showing them how to measure the spacing between rows. "Beans need room to climb. Carrots can grow closer together." He dropped seeds into Lucy's cupped palms. "Like sowing prayers," he mused. "Plant them deep, tend them faithful, trust the good Lord for harvest." "Oops," Lucy giggled, as a gust of wind scattered seeds from her hands. Lila quickly helped gather them up, both girls' skirts getting muddy at the knees. "No matter," James assured them. "Nature's got her own way of planting. Some of those might sprout wild come summer." They worked through the morning, breaking only when Lucy announced she'd try her hand at baking biscuits for their noon meal. The results were decidedly mixed, golden brown on top, but black as coal on the bottom. "Lord have mercy," Lila laughed, tapping one particularly solid specimen against her plate. "Reckon these could serve as ammunition if we run low on rifle shot." Lucy's face fell slightly, but James quickly broke one open, spreading it thick with butter and honey. "Nothing wrong with a sturdy biscuit," he declared, taking a determined bite. "My first tries at camp bread could have sunk a riverboat. You'll get the knack of it." His reward was Lucy's, bright smile returning. She'd been quieter than her sister these past weeks, but moments like this brought out her gentle spirit. Later that afternoon, as James mended a hole in the cabin's roof, Lila's clear voice rose up from below. She was singing an old hymn he hadn't heard in years, not since Clara used to lead the singing at prairie church meetings. "I know that one," he called down, surprising himself. The words came back, slow but sure. "Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy praise." Aunt Clara loved this hymn, Lila said, her eyes distant with memory. She'd sing it while grating papers or hanging wash, said it reminded her of someone special who taught her about grace. James's hands stilled on the shingles. Had Clara truly kept him in her heart all those years? The thought both warmed and pained him. "Teach it to me proper?" he asked quietly. So Lila did, line by line, until their voices blended in the ancient words of praise. Even Lucy joined in from where she was tending the new garden, her sweet soprano lifting the melody heavenward. The days lengthened, sweet and slow. James showed the girls how to check his trap lines, teaching them to read the signs of rabbit and fox. They in turn brought fresh eyes to his bachelor ways, straightening the cabin's sparse furnishings and adding small touches, a bunch of wildflowers in a jar, a neat stack of clean dishes, the Bible always open on the table. One evening, as spring's first stars began to flicker through the cabin windows, Lucy lit the lamp and opened that well-worn Bible. The leather cover was soft with age, the pages marked with Clara's neat notations. "May I read aloud?" she asked shyly. At James's nod, she turned to a marked passage and began. "Mercy triumphs over judgment." The words hung in the lamplit air. James looked up from where he was oiling his rifle, suddenly struck by their truth. Here he sat with two souls the law would condemn, yet every day showed him God's mercy at work, in their care for each other, in simple gifts of garden and song, in laughter replacing loneliness. "There's more," Lucy continued softly. "It says here that perfect love casts out fear." She touched the page where Clara had underlined those words. Aunt Clara wrote in the margin, "Perfect love means choosing mercy, even when the law says otherwise." James set aside his rifle, moved beyond words. He'd been wrestling with his conscience these many weeks, trying to balance his duty to the law against the clear calling to protect these innocent lives. Clara's written wisdom felt like absolution. "Your aunt was a wise woman," he managed finally. "Reckon she knew a thing or two about God's kind of justice." Lila stirred the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "She used to say that sometimes the Lord's law is written in the heart, not on paper. That's why she helped us escape. Said she couldn't bear to see 2 more young lives ruined by men's cruel rules." They sat quiet, a moment, remembering. Then Lucy closed the Bible and went to fetch their supper bowls. The simple meal of beans and cornbread tasted rich as a feast, shared in the lamp's golden circle. Afterward, James told them stories of his own youth, tales of his mother's garden back in Missouri, of learning to track deer with his father, of the first time he saw the mountains rising like God's own ramparts against the sky. The twins listened eagerly, their faces glowing in the lamplight. "Tell us about when you met Aunt Clara," Lucy urged, but James shook his head gently. "That's a story for another night," he said. "Time for sleep now." The girls climbed to their loft, their whispered goodnights floating down like falling leaves. James stepped outside into the cool evening air, breathing deep of spring's sweet promise. Above him, the stars blazed forth in glory, the first truly clear night since winter's grip had eased. The Big Dipper hung like a silver ladle over Lost Elk Valley, pouring out light across the darkness. A whippoorwill called from the forest edge, and somewhere far off a coyote answered. James stood long in the starlight, feeling the peace of the moment settle in his soul. The worry and fear that had haunted him these past months seemed to lift away like morning mist. Here, now, he could sense God's purpose working out in ways he'd never expected. Where he'd sought solitude, the Lord had sent him family. Where he'd hidden from his past, Clara's memory lived on in the gentle hearts of her nieces. Where he'd feared judgment, mercy bloomed like crocuses after winter's long night. "Thank you," he whispered to the stars, to Clara's memory, to the God who worked in mysterious ways. The night wind touched his face like a benison, carrying the sweet scent of spring earth and new beginnings. Inside the cabin, he heard Lucy humming softly, that same hymn of praise that had brought such unexpected joy to their day. James smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own measures of work and wonder. For now, it was enough to stand beneath heaven's dome, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, keeping their ancient watch over the little cabin and its sleeping inhabitants. Spring's sweet mercy had come at last to Lost Elk Valley, bringing with it the promise of grace renewed and faith restored. The spring afternoon light slanted golden through the cabin windows as Lucy carefully smoothed Clara's letter on the table. She'd taken to reading it daily, finding comfort in her aunt's familiar handwriting. James watched from his chair by the fire, whittling a new handle for his axe, while Lila hung fresh curtains they'd sewn from feed sacks. "I just want to keep it nice," Lucy explained, using her apron to gently dust the creased paper. "The edges are getting worn." As she lifted the letter, something fluttered to the floor, a second sheet that had been hidden in the fold. Lucy bent to retrieve it, but her fingers trembled as she read the first lines. "James," she whispered, her face going pale, "I think you need to see this." He set aside his whittling and crossed to the table. Lucy handed him the paper with shaking hands. The same familiar script flowed across the page, but these words made his heart stop. "My dearest James, by the time you read this, I will have passed from this world. Truly, this time, not like the lie that has haunted us both these 15 years. I never perished in the Abilene fire as you were told. My shame at losing faith after that terrible night drove me into hiding. I could not face you or anyone else. While you grieved, thinking me dead, I lived quietly just 30 miles from Lost Elk, teaching at a small mission school, and later raising my sister's daughters after consumption took her and her husband." James's knees gave way. He sank into the chair, the paper trembling in his grip. All these years, all the prayers, the grief, the lonely nights, and she had been so close. "She was alive," he breathed, "all this time?" Lucy and Lila huddled together, tears streaming down their faces. "We didn't know about the fire," Lila sobbed. She never told us why she lived so quietly, but she spoke of you often, said you were the most honorable man she'd ever known." James forced himself to read on, each word both blessing and blade to his heart. "The night of the fire, I lost more than my belongings. I lost my faith, my courage, my trust in God's mercy. How could he let such evil touch his house? The mission school burning, those poor children. I fled in my night clothes, my heart as scorched as the timber. When I learned you believed me dead, my cowardice won out. Better you think me a blessed memory than know I had become a doubting Thomas, unworthy of your steadfast faith. But God's grace finds us even in our wandering. These precious girls restored my faith day by day. Their parents, my dear sister and her husband, trusted me to raise them in righteousness. When evil men began circling them like wolves, I knew I must send them to you. The deed to the Willow Flats Ranch is my attempt at restitution. I purchased it years ago, dreaming of the day I might find courage to seek your forgiveness. Let it be their sanctuary now, and perhaps some small healing for the pain I caused you. I go to my rest knowing they will be safe in your care. Your love for me was always pure as mountain snow. I pray that love might extend to these innocent souls who have suffered too much already. Forgive me, James. I loved you more truly than my weak faith deserved. Yours eternally, Clara." The confession fell from James's numb fingers. Outside, thunder rolled across the peaks, heralding an approaching storm. The cabin grew dark as clouds gathered, but none of them moved to light the lamp. Lucy's soft weeping broke the silence. "She carried such guilt," she whispered. "All those years, loving us, teaching us, but carrying that weight." "We knew she was sick," Lila added, wiping her eyes. "But she never let on how sick until the very end. Said she had to finish the letter to you first." James stood abruptly and walked to the window. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, pattering on the new garden shoots. His reflection in the glass showed a face he hardly recognized, grief and joy warring in every line. "She was right here," he said hoarsely, "right here in this valley while I wandered the high country, thinking myself a widower in spirit if not law. I could have—" His voice broke. Lucy came to stand beside him, her small hand slipping into his rough one. "She loved you to the end," she said softly. "Said we'd know you by your kindness, just like hers. And we did." "The ranch deed," Lila remembered suddenly. "It's real then? A true place we can call home?" James turned from the window, squeezing Lucy's hand before letting go. He retrieved the deed from his trunk, studying it with new eyes. "Willow Flats," he read. 300 acres with water rights and a standing house. She meant it as a fresh start for all of us. Thunder crashed closer now, and wind rattled the cabin's shutters. James struck a match to light the lamp, its warm glow pushing back the storm's darkness. In that light, he looked at the twins, truly looked at them, and saw Clara in every line of their young faces. Her spirit lived in Lucy's gentle faith and Lila's quiet strength. "We can't stay here," he said finally. "Lost Elk's too close to those hunting you. But Willow Flats?" He spread the deed on the table. "It's 3 days' ride south, near the Kansas line. Good water, good grass, far enough from anywhere to be safe." "You'd take us there?" Lucy asked hopefully. "Really make a home of it?" James nodded slowly. "Come morning, we'll pack what we need and ride south. Clara bought that land as a gift of love. Reckon the best way to honor her memory is to use it as she intended, a sanctuary for those she loved." The girls flew to embrace him, their tears now mixed with joy. James held them close, marveling at how these two had breached his careful walls. Through them, Clara's love still worked its healing magic. Later, As the storm raged outside, they sat by the fire reading from Clara's Bible. Lucy found the passage about new wine requiring new wineskins, and James felt the truth of it in his bones. His old life of solitude had served its purpose. Now God called him to something new, not just protecting these girls, but truly becoming the father figure Clara had trusted him to be. The lamp burned low as evening deepened into night. James added wood to the fire, listening to the thunder's diminishing rumble. The twins had fallen asleep on their pallet near the hearth, their faces peaceful in the firelight. He stood watch by the window, rifle close at hand. Through a break in the clouds, he glimpsed the first stars appearing. A movement on the ridge caught his eye, a lone rider passing in the gloom. The man paused, perhaps noting the smoke from James's chimney, then rode on without investigating. James let out a careful breath. Soon enough they would leave this hideaway for a true home at Willow Flats. But tonight, the cabin held them safe in its warm embrace, while Clara's love watched over them all like a benediction. He touched the letter in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. "I forgive you," he whispered to her memory, "and I'll keep them safe as my own. You have my word." The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the storm-washed night, a whippoorwill called, singing of spring, of renewal, of hope restored. The first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in whispers of gray when James began loading his horse. His breath clouded in the crisp morning air as he methodically secured supplies for their journey south. 3 days' worth of dried beef, coffee, and hardtack. Ammunition, Clara's Bible. The precious deed to Willow Flats. Inside the cabin, Lucy and Lila slept peacefully, wrapped in his mother's old quilt. James paused in the doorway, watching them breathe. They looked so young in the fading darkness, their faces smooth with innocent dreams. His chest tightened with an unfamiliar warmth, a feeling of responsibility mixed with something deeper. The horse nickered softly as James adjusted the cinch one final time. That's when he caught it, the faintest whiff of smoke on the wind. Not wood smoke from his own chimney, but something sharper, more urgent. He turned toward the cabin, and his heart stopped. Thin tendrils of smoke were curling from beneath the eaves, dark against the lightening sky. As he watched in horror, orange flames began licking through the roof shingles. "Lucy! Lila!" James bellowed, sprinting for the door. "Fire! Get out now!" He burst inside to find the girls already scrambling from their bedrolls, coughing in the thickening smoke. The ceiling crackled ominously above them. "The back trail!" James shouted, grabbing their arms and pushing them toward the rear door. "Run for the creek bed! Don't stop!" Lucy clutched the land deed to her chest as they fled into the pre-dawn chill. Behind them, flames roared through the cabin's dry timber. James heard horses approaching from the front, multiple riders moving fast. "Keep going," he urged, drawing his rifle. "Don't look back." The girls ran, their night dresses fluttering white in the dim light. 20 yards, 30, almost to the safety of the creek's cover. James raised his rifle, ready to fire warning shots to cover their escape. Lucy's foot caught on a half-buried root, slick with snowmelt. She went down hard, crying out in pain. The deed fluttered from her grasp. "Lucy!" Lila turned back for her sister. A rifle cracked from the trees. Splinters flew from a trunk near James's head. He returned fire, aiming high, trying to drive the attackers back. But they had surrounded the clearing while the fire drew him out. Something hard slammed into the back of his skull. Stars exploded across his vision as he sprawled face first in the mud. His rifle clattered away. "Got you now, mountain man," a rough voice growled. Through blurring vision, James saw boots approaching. He tried to rise, but another blow drove him down. Blood trickled warm down his neck. "No!" Lucy screamed. "Please don't hurt him!" James forced his head up. Two men were dragging the struggling girls toward waiting horses. Their faces were covered by bandanas, but he recognized the fancy pistols from before. The saloon keeper's hired guns. "Leave them be," James croaked. "They're just children." A boot caught him in the ribs. "Shut your mouth. You had your chance to hand them over proper." Behind them, the cabin was fully engulfed now, sending sparks spiraling into the lightning sky. James watched helplessly as the men bound the girls' hands and lifted them onto horses. "Please," Lila sobbed. "Mr. Boone!" James crawled toward his fallen rifle, every movement sending lightning through his skull. He had to stop them, had to protect Clara's girls, his girls. Another blow knocked him flat. This time darkness crept at the edges of his vision. He tasted blood. Through the roar of flames and his own thundering pulse, he heard hoofbeats retreating. The girls' cries grew fainter. "Not again," James whispered. "Dear God, not again." He dragged himself toward the creek, clutching Clara's Bible that had fallen from his coat. The water might save him from the spreading fire if he could reach it, but his limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was fresh snow beginning to fall, delicate flakes hissing as they met the flames consuming his home. Hours passed in darkness. James Boone, you hold on now." The voice seemed to come from very far away. Rough hands were turning him over, checking for life. "Still breathing, thank the Lord, but cold as death itself." James tried to open his eyes, but could manage only a groan. Every part of him hurt. "Easy there, son. Old Gus has got you." He recognized the voice now. Gus Tanner, his nearest neighbor from 3 miles down the valley. The old rancher must have seen the smoke. "The girls," James mumbled through cracked lips. "They took—" "Save your strength," Gus ordered. "We need to get you warmed up before you freeze solid." James felt himself being lifted onto what must be Gus's wagon. The motion sent waves of agony through his head. "Clara's Bible," he gasped. "Don't leave." "Got it right here," Gus assured him. "Now hush and let me get you to Doc Maxwell in town." The wagon lurched into motion. James fought to stay conscious, but the pain and cold were too much. He slipped back into darkness as fresh snow continued to fall, covering the ashes of his ruined cabin and the tracks of those who had destroyed his fragile peace. The last coherent thought he had was of Lucy and Lila's faces, trusting and afraid as they were carried away into the dawn. He had failed them, failed Clara's final wish. "Not again," he whispered one last time before the darkness took him completely. Old Gus's mule plodded steadily through the snowfall, hauling the wagon and its injured passenger toward Mill Junction. Behind them, the remains of James's cabin smoldered in the growing light of a cold spring morning. Consciousness returned to James Boone in fragments, like shards of broken glass catching sunlight. First came the smell, carbolic soap and wood smoke, then sound, someone turning pages, murmuring words from scripture. Finally, pain. His ribs screamed with each breath, and his head throbbed as though struck by lightning. He lay on a narrow cot in what he recognized as Dr. Maxwell's back room in Mill Junction. Afternoon light filtered through a small window, casting long shadows across rough planked walls. Beside him, Reverend Elias Pike's weathered face was bent over a well-worn Bible, his lips moving silently as he read. "Psalm 23, James whispered, his voice rough as sandpaper. The The preacher looked up, relief washing over his lined face. "Welcome back, brother. You've been burning with fever these past 2 days." James tried to sit up but fell back with a groan. His chest was wrapped tight with bandages, and dried blood still matted his hair where the rifle butt had struck. "The girls," he croaked. "How long?" "Easy now." Pike placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Old Gus found you Wednesday morning by your burned-out cabin. It's Friday afternoon." 2 days. 2 days the twins had been in the hands of those men. James closed his eyes against a wave of nausea. From pain or guilt, he couldn't tell. "I failed them. Failed Clara." "Tell me everything," Pike said quietly. "From the beginning." So James did. His voice grew stronger as he spoke of the girls arriving in the storm, of Clara's letter and the truth of her survival, of the weeks they'd spent becoming a family. When he described the attack and the twins being dragged away, his hands clenched into fists despite the pain. "I have to go after them," he finished. "Those men, they work for a saloon keeper in Drift Creek, the same one who tried to force them into his establishment before," Pike finished. "Yes, Gus told me what little he knew." The preacher was silent a moment, studying James's face. "What's in your heart right now, brother? Vengeance or justice?" James looked away. "Does it matter? Those girls need help." "It matters more than anything." Pike leaned forward. "The path you choose now will shape not just your fate, but theirs as well. Will you go as an agent of God's mercy or as an instrument of wrath?" "I don't know if I'm strong enough for mercy," James admitted. "When I think of them afraid, alone." "Then let me tell you what I see." Pike's voice was gentle but firm. "I see a man who opened his door to strangers in a storm, who protected innocent lives at the cost of his own peace, who lied to a marshal, something I know pained your righteous soul, because a higher law demanded it." He touched James's bandaged head. "Who took a beating rather than draw blood?" James was silent, remembering Lucy's face as she fell, Lila's tears as they rode away. "The Lord didn't preserve you from that fire just so you could go starting another," Pike continued. "There's a better way, a lawful way." "The law already failed them once," James protested. "That marshal was working from false information." Pike stood and walked to the window. "But now we have proof of the truth. Clara's letter, the deed, your testimony as a respected citizen. The law can work for justice if we let it." Outside, a wagon rattled past on Mill Junction, Single Street. James thought of his own father, who'd always said a man's character showed clearest in how he handled being wronged. "What do you suggest?" he asked finally. Pike smiled. "First, you need to heal enough to ride. Then we'll need transportation." The door creaked open, and old Gus stuck his grizzled head in. "Already ahead of you there, Reverend. Got my wagon all loaded up. Provisions, blankets, even that Bible of yours they pulled from the creek, James." He nodded at the bed. "Whenever you're ready, son." James pushed himself up slowly, grinding his teeth against the pain. "I'm ready now." "Now hold on," Pike protested, but James was already swinging his legs over the side of the cot. "Every hour we wait is another hour those girls suffer," he said. "I can rest in the wagon." Pike and Gus exchanged looks. Then the preacher sighed. "At least let Doc Maxwell check your bandages first. And you'll need proper clothes. Those are still covered in blood." An hour later, James sat propped against blankets in the back of Gus's wagon, wearing a clean shirt borrowed from the general store. His ribs protested every bump in the rutted road, but he set his jaw against the pain. Clara's Bible lay in his lap, its pages warped from creek water but still intact. They stopped briefly at the telegraph office on the edge of town. Pike disappeared inside while Gus checked the traces on his team. "You did right by those girls," the old rancher said quietly. "Clara would be proud." James touched the Bible's worn cover. I pray she would. Pike emerged from the telegraph office looking satisfied. Message sent to Marshal Weller at the county seat. Explained everything. The girl's situation, the saloon keeper's men, the attack on your cabin. He'll meet us in Drift Creek. And if he sides with them again? James asked. Then we'll handle it proper and legal, Pike said firmly. But I don't think he will. Weller's a good man. Just needed the full truth. They made steady progress through the afternoon, following the stage road south toward Drift Creek. James dozed fitfully, his dreams full of smoke and screaming girls. Each time he woke, Pike or Gus would offer him water and gentle words of encouragement. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, Gus guided the wagon off the road into a small grove of cottonwoods. "Team needs rest," he announced. "And so do you, James." They made a simple camp. Coffee and beans heated over a small fire, blankets spread on the cooling ground. James sat with his back against a tree, Clara's Bible open in his lap, though it was too dark to read. "Oh, Clara," he whispered, touching the familiar pages. "Give me strength to do this right." "She already has," Pike said softly from across the fire. "Her love for those girls and yours. That's all the strength you need. The Lord will handle the rest." James nodded slowly. Despite his fear for the twins, a strange peace settled over him. He would find them, yes, but not with guns blazing or vengeance in his heart. He would do it with faith and law and mercy, the way Clara would have wanted. The fire crackled low as night deepened around them. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called once, then fell silent. James kept his vigil, watching the stars wheel overhead, praying for dawn to come quickly. Tomorrow they would reach Drift Creek, and with God's help, he would make things right. Gray clouds hung low over Drift Creek like a shroud, as James, Reverend Pike, and Old Gus guided their wagon down the muddy main street. The town had grown since James last passed through. A dozen new buildings crowded the thoroughfare, their fresh-cut lumber still pale against the weathered structures. But the Red Horn Saloon dominated everything, its garish red paint and gilt lettering a beacon of sin at the heart of town. Piano music leaked through its swinging doors, along with raucous laughter that made James's jaw tighten. His ribs still ached fiercely beneath the bandages, but he forced himself to breathe steady. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice, God's justice, served with mercy. "You sure about going in unarmed?" Gus asked quietly as they hitched the wagon. "Them's dangerous men in there." James patted his coat pocket where Clara's letter and the deed rested. "These are the only weapons I need today." He touched the Bible tucked in his other pocket. "That, and the Lord's Word." Pike squeezed his shoulder. "We'll be right behind you, brother." The saloon's bat-wing doors creaked as James pushed through them. Tobacco smoke hung thick in the air, and the piano player was hammering out a bawdy tune while painted women circled the room with drinks. His entrance drew few looks at first, just another trail-dusty stranger seeking relief from the road. But then someone recognized him. Well, if it ain't the mountain man himself. The voice belonged to Hank Dorgan, who stood behind the polished bar in a fancy brocade vest. The saloon keeper's face was handsome in a cruel way, his smile sharp as a knife. "Come to claim what ain't yours, have you?" The piano music stuttered to a stop. Every eye in the place turned to James as he walked slowly to the bar, his boots leaving, muddy prints on the sawdust floor. "I've come for the Cooper girls," James said quietly, "and to deliver something you need to see." Dorgan's laugh was ugly. "Those girls are here legal and proper. Their daddy lost them fair and square at cards, signed the contract himself before he took the coward's way out." He produced a wrinkled paper from under the bar. See here? Everything nice and official. Read this first. James laid Clara's letter on the bar. Out loud, if you please. Let everyone hear the truth. Dorgan's eyes narrowed, but the growing crowd of onlookers pressed closer. A man in the back called out, "Read it, Hank! Let's hear what the mountain man's got!" With obvious reluctance, Dorgan picked up the letter. His face darkened as he recognized the handwriting. To James Boone, he read, whom I wronged grievously by my silence. The saloon grew quieter with each word as Clara's story unfolded. Her survival of the Abilene fire, her shame at losing faith, her years caring for her sister's orphaned daughters. When Dorgan reached the part about the land deed and James's legal guardianship of the girls, his voice cracked. "It's a forgery," he snarled, trying to tear the paper. But James's hand shot out, catching his wrist. "The deed's registered with the territory office," James said. "Marshal Weller confirmed it by telegraph yesterday. You've got no claim on those girls, Hank. Never did." "They're mine!" Dorgan yanked free, face purpling. "I bought them fair." The saloon doors burst open. Marshal Weller stood there, his badge gleaming, flanked by 2 deputies. "Nobody buys people in my jurisdiction, Dorgan. Not anymore." A woman screamed upstairs. Boots thundered on the steps as Lila and Lucy appeared, their faces lighting up at the sight of James. They flew down the stairs and into his arms, nearly knocking him over despite his injuries. "You came for us," Lucy sobbed into his shirt. "We knew you would." "Hush now," James whispered, holding them close. "Of course I came. Your family." Dorgan tried to bolt, but the deputies caught him. Marshal Weller read out the charges: fraud, kidnapping, assault on James's cabin. The saloon-keeper's protests died as his former customers turned away in disgust. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Pike said quietly, appearing at James's side. "But his justice always comes due." James couldn't speak. Tears ran freely down his face as he clutched the girls, overwhelmed by God's mercy. The townsfolk watched in respectful silence as he sank to his knees, still embracing the twins. "Thank you, Lord," he prayed aloud, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for bringing these little ones home." Lucy began softly singing one of Clara's old hymns. Others in the crowd joined in, their voices filling the transformed saloon with praise. Even Marshal Weller removed his hat, touched by the scene. Through his tears, James saw Dorgan being led away in chains, the man's power broken by truth and love. The gray sky outside had begun to clear, sending rays of sunlight through the saloon's dusty windows. God's light, James thought, touching Clara's Bible in his pocket. The light of mercy triumphing over judgment at last. The wagon wheels creaked as James guided the team up the familiar trail to Lost Elk Valley. Beside him, Lucy and Lila sat quietly, their faces drawn with anticipation. Reverend Pike followed on horseback, his saddlebags heavy with provisions. The late spring air carried the scent of wild roses and fresh pine, but as they crested the final ridge, another smell drifted up: burnt timber. James felt the twins tense as his cabin came into view, or what remained of it. Blackened logs lay scattered like fallen soldiers, the once proud roof now nothing but ash. The stone chimney stood alone against the sky, a sentinel watching over ruins. Even the garden they had planted lay trampled, though a few stubborn crocuses still pushed through the mud. "Oh, James," Lucy whispered, gripping his arm. "I'm so sorry." He helped them down from the wagon, his throat tight. Everything he had built over years of solitude, gone. But as he stood there, Lila squared her shoulders and marched toward the wreckage. "We can rebuild it," she declared, kicking aside a charred beam. "Better than before. Big enough for all of us." Lucy nodded firmly. "We'll help. You taught us about setting posts and chinking logs." James started to protest. It was too much work, too dangerous for young ladies. But Pike interrupted with a gentle laugh. "Don't try arguing with them, brother. The Lord's given you helpers whether you want them or not." Before James could respond, hoofbeats sounded on the trail. Old Gus appeared, leading 3 more riders. They carried axes and saws across their saddles. "Heard you folks was coming home today," Gus called out. "Figured you might need some hands." James stared at the unexpected help. "I can't pay." "Ain't asking for pay," one of the riders said. "Just bringing back what neighbors owe. You took in these girls when nobody else would. Time we returned the kindness." Over the next weeks, more helpers arrived. The storekeeper's wife from Mill Junction brought nails and window glass. A widowed rancher donated fresh-cut pine logs. Even the telegraph operator rode up one Sunday with his tools and stayed to help raise the walls. They worked from sunrise to sunset. James taught the twins to strip bark and notch corners, while the men handled the heavy lifting. Lucy proved especially clever with a measuring string, ensuring the walls stayed true. Lila organized the workers' meals, making sure everyone ate well. Pike visited often, bringing encouragement and extra hands. He found James one evening, examining the newly laid floor joists. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," the preacher said. "Sometimes he has to tear down our walls before he can build something better." James nodded, watching the twins sweep the workspace clean. "I built the first cabin to hide from the world. This one's different." "Because it's built with love," Pike replied, "and that makes all the difference." By midsummer, the new cabin stood proud against the mountains. Larger than the original, it boasted 3 sturdy bunks, a proper cooking hearth, and windows that caught the morning light. White curtains, sewn by Lucy from flour sacks, softened the rough-hewn walls. Above the door hung a simple wooden cross James had carved from heart pine. The porch became their favorite gathering spot. Each evening, they would carry their supper outside to watch deer graze in the meadow. Sometimes other families joined them, bringing music and laughter to the once lonely valley. The twins' presence had somehow built bridges James never knew he needed. One quiet evening, as purple shadows lengthened across the grass, Lucy began humming Clara's lullaby. The sweet, familiar tune drifted through the cooling air while James worked on the porch rail with his carving knife. "What are you making?" Lila asked, peering over his shoulder. James stepped back, revealing the words he had carved deep into the wood. "Boone family." The twins' eyes filled with tears. They hugged him tight, and James felt something final settle in his heart. Like evening dew blessing the grass, peace descended on their little homestead. "I reckon Clara would be mighty pleased," Pike said softly from his rocking chair, seeing how her letter brought all this to pass. James touched the carved letters, feeling each groove with calloused fingers. "She always said God's mercy was bigger than our mistakes. Took me all these years to understand what she meant." Lucy leaned against his shoulder, still humming that gentle tune. In the meadow, a doe and 2 fawns stepped delicately through the wild roses. The summer air smelled of fresh-cut wood, hope, and home. The morning dew still sparkled on the grass when a rider appeared at the new cabin. His mud-spattered horse and official-looking satchel marked him as a messenger from Willow Flats. James accepted the envelope with steady hands, but his heart quickened as he read the contents. 30 days, he said quietly to the twins. "We have to claim the ranch in person, or it goes to the state." Lucy and Lila exchanged worried glances. "How far is Willow Flats?" Lucy asked. 4 days by wagon if the weather holds." James folded the papers carefully. "Best we leave tomorrow." They packed efficiently: bedrolls, food, Clara's Bible, and the deed. Dawn found them heading east, the loaded wagon creaking over spring-softened trails. The twins took turns driving, while James rode alongside on horseback, watching for trouble. Their first camp settled beside Cottonwood Creek, where fish jumped in the fading light. As they ate fresh-caught trout, Lila asked about Clara's childhood. James shared memories of school days and church socials, his voice growing soft with remembrance. On the second afternoon, their back wheel struck a hidden root and split clean through. James studied the broken spokes with concern. "There's a settlement 2 miles ahead," he said. "I'll ride for help." He returned with a replacement wheel, but the delay cost them precious hours. That night, they camped late, the campfire casting warm light on tired faces as they shared the last of their biscuits. The fourth evening brought them to Clara's ranch. The fence posts leaned with age, and tall grass waved through the yard. But the soil was rich and dark, the well still flowing sweet and clear. An old barn stood sound despite its weathered boards. Inside the land office, James signed his name beside Clara's on the deed. His hand trembled slightly, remembering her delicate script in that final letter. Back at the ranch, they knelt together in the overgrown garden. James's prayer was simple but heartfelt. "Lord, thank you for bringing us home. Let this land be a blessing," as Clara wished. The twins had saved wildflower seeds from Lost Elk Valley. As the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, they scattered them across the fresh-turned earth. Promise taking root in prairie soil. That night, they made beds in the barn's sweet-smelling hay. James heard the girls whispering prayers above him in the loft, their voices mixing with the evening wind. Clara's last wish was fulfilled. Not just the land, but a family to cherish it. The summer days stretched long and golden at Willow Flats. James watched from the porch as wild roses climbed the new fence posts, their pink blooms nodding in the prairie wind. Inside the ranch house, voices rose and fell like bird song. Mrs. Sarah Whitman, a kindly widow from the next homestead over, teaching the girls their letters. "Mind your penmanship now," she'd say, guiding their hands across ruled paper. A steady hand makes for clear thoughts. James had hired her 3 weeks ago, knowing the twins needed more schooling than he could give. Mrs. Whitman brought with her not just knowledge, but also acceptance, spreading word through the community that the Boone family was decent folk despite their unusual story. Still, whispers followed them at Sunday services. James heard them clearly enough. Murmurs about 2 young girls living with a bachelor, about their flight from Drift Creek, about the mysterious Clara. He held his head high, knowing truth would outlast gossip. The girls bloomed under Mrs. Whitman's care. Lucy's reading improved daily, while Lila showed a gift for figures that surprised them all. Together they transformed the ranch house with small touches. Curtains sewn from flour sacks, wildflowers in tin cups, and hymns sung over washing dishes. When Reverend Matthews rode out from the county seat to visit, James knew it was time to make things right before God and community. He had spent weeks clearing out the old storage room, transforming it into a proper chapel. Fresh whitewash brightened the walls, and clear glass windows let in streams of light. On a Sunday afternoon, neighbors gathered in the small chapel. James stood before them, Lila and Lucy at his sides, their blue calico dresses matching the summer sky outside. "This chapel," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I dedicate to the memory of Clara Wren Boone, who taught me that love is stronger than loss." He paused, looking at the twins. "And to these girls who showed me that family isn't just blood, its faith and mercy lived out daily. Lila squeezed his hand, while Lucy wiped quiet tears from her cheeks. Mrs. Whitman nodded approval from her seat, and several neighbors murmured, "Amen." That evening, rain drummed softly on the roof, the first real storm since they'd arrived. James gathered the girls in the main room, Clara's Bible open on his lap. Thunder rolled distant and low as he began their nightly prayers. "Dear Lord," he said, his voice gentle in the lamplight, "thank you for bringing us home. Thank you for second chances, for daughters of the heart, and for showing us that your love makes a family." Lucy and Lila's voices joined his, steady and sure. Amen. The thunder faded away, leaving only the peaceful patter of rain and the warm certainty that they were, at last, truly home. Golden light spilled across Willow Flats as September painted the meadows in amber and rust. The morning frost had melted away, leaving the grass jeweled with dew. James Boone sat on the wide front porch, his weathered hands steady as he worked a piece of pine wood with his whittling knife. Curls of pale wood gathered at his feet, while a half-formed bird took shape beneath his careful blade. The aroma of baking bread drifted through the screened door, mingling with voices raised in song. Lucy and Lila's clear tones carried the old hymn, "Amazing Grace," out across the valley, their harmony as natural as breathing. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. James smiled, remembering how far they'd all traveled since that stormy night at Lost Elk Cabin. Now the ranch flourished under their care. Fat cattle grazed in the eastern pasture, their red-brown coats catching the autumn sun. The barn stood freshly painted, its hayloft filled for winter. Garden rows showed the last of summer's bounty, pumpkins ripening orange among withering vines, late corn standing tall. Inside, pots clattered as the twins prepared supper. Their voices drifted out again, this time singing, "What a friend we have in Jesus." James set aside his carving and closed his eyes, letting the peace wash over him. The mountain wind stirred his graying hair, carrying the sharp scent of pine and coming frost. A rider appeared on the valley road, moving slow. James watched the approaching figure with careful eyes, habits of caution not entirely forgotten. But as the stranger drew closer, James saw only weariness in the slump of his shoulders. The man pulled up at the gate, touching his hat brim. "Evening, sir. Might you spare some water for my horse? Been riding since dawn." James stood, tucking his knife away. "Water and welcome, friend. You look like you could use a rest yourself." The traveler, young, trail-dusty, with honest eyes, dismounted stiffly. "Much obliged. Name's Thomas Parker, heading north to my sister's place near Fort Collins." "James Boone," James replied, helping lead the tired horse to the water trough. "You're welcome to stay for supper. My daughters always cook plenty." As if on cue, the twins appeared in the doorway, wiping flour from their hands on blue-checked aprons. "Pa?" Lucy called. "Biscuits are nearly done." "Set another plate," James answered. "We've got company." The young man tried to protest, but James held up a hand. "Once, not so long ago, 2 strangers knocked on my door in need. The good Lord sent them to change my life. Least I can do is pass that kindness forward." Inside, lamplight warmed the kitchen's pine walls. Steam rose from a pot of beef stew, thick with vegetables. Fresh-baked biscuits filled a cloth-lined basket, their golden tops glistening with butter. The twins moved with easy grace, setting out plates and cups, while their guest washed up at the basin. "This is right kind of you," Thomas said as they bowed heads for grace. "Been a long spell since I sat at a proper table." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. the Lord provides, often through strangers' hands. They shared the simple meal, trading news of distant towns and weather signs. Thomas spoke of his widowed sister waiting up north, of hopes for work and a fresh start. The twins listened with bright interest, passing him second helpings of everything. As dusk deepened outside the windows, the oil lamps cast warm circles of light. James excused himself and stepped out onto the porch. The evening wind had turned cool, carrying winter's first whisper down from the high country. Stars were beginning to spark in the darkening sky. He drew a deep breath of the crystalline air, feeling its familiar bite. So much had changed since that bitter night when two frightened girls had pounded on his cabin door. The Lord had led him from isolation to family, from grief to joy, from mere survival to truly living. James looked up at the vast sweep of stars, his heart full. "They came for one night, Lord," he murmured, "but you sent me a lifetime." Behind him, the screen door creaked. "Supper's ready, Pa," the twins called in unison, their voices bright with love and belonging. Lamplight spilled around their silhouettes, turning their hair to gold. James turned to his daughters, for that's truly what they were now, in every way that mattered. Lucy's quick smile and Lila's thoughtful eyes, both so dear to him. Who would have thought that answering a desperate knock could lead to such grace? Their guest stood in the doorway, too, watching the family moment with quiet understanding. "You've built something fine here, Mr. Boone," he said softly. "The Lord built it," James corrected gently. "I just tried not to stand in his way." They gathered again around the table as night settled over Willow Flats. The twins poured coffee and served apple pie still warm from the oven. Their guest's trail-weary face had softened, touched by the simple gifts of food and fellowship. Through the windows, James could see stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. The same stars that had watched over Lost Elk Cabin, over their long journey, over every step that led them here. His heart swelled with gratitude for all of it. The hard times that had taught him strength, the loss that had opened his heart to love again, and most of all, for two young girls who had trusted him enough to become his family. Here in this moment, surrounded by warmth and light and the sounds of gentle laughter, James Boone knew a peace deeper than the mountain valleys. The Lord had indeed restored his soul, turning winter to spring, loneliness to love, and a solitary man into a father blessed beyond measure. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.